Yeah, thank you. I can't remember if I said it 3 years ago, but I was actually born in Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. And so I'm a Michigander also, but I left when I was 2 to Arizona where I grew up. And it's good to come back to Michigan and see such a wonderful turnout. And I was mentioning to somebody just before that, so far, no stupid questions, which is really good. If you've been doing a lot of interfaith, you know the problem of the questions. And so I can definitely see that everyone here is smart enough to have a crisis of faith. So, if you'll notice, this is going to be a serious talk, and so what I did is I put some of this up. We've got a PowerPoint presentation that's going to help you around the side here, and if you notice hold it. It's already acting funny on me. Let's see. Here we go. Let's quit. It's just a software ad. I think we're okay. All right. If you'll notice, the title of the talk here is we put the no in innovation. As Mark Twain said, good writers borrow, great writers steal. The title of this lecture, as some of you may recognize, was taken from a TV ad campaign for post-shredded wheat. I couldn't get the right company for Battle Creek, in which a famous CEO named Frank Druffel condemns innovation and promotes shredded wheat as the traditional values cereal. What makes the ad funny is that it lampoons the conservative notion of innovation as the abandonment of a more wholesome past, when families were more stable, when people were more virtuous, a person could count on honest pay for honest work, and citizens had a greater appreciation for values and ethics. Innovation in this view is not an advance toward progress, but a decline from a golden age. As Kelly Peters, Director of Integrated Insights and Strategy for Post Food, said in an interview with Marketing Daily, and I quote, "There's been a marked change in American values with a greater desire for honesty, trustworthiness, and security during a time of economic and societal uncertainty. Post's marketing messages underscore that shredded wheat has always been a simple, honest brand and one of the healthiest foods on the grocery shelf." Now, religious conservatives often oppose the historical and comparative method that we use in religious studies because it shows that when it comes to golden ages, as Gertrude Stein said about Oakland, California, there is no there. In other words, when any golden age is examined critically, it proves to be a myth. As a trope, a style, or a fashion in religion, philosophy, or literature, the notion of a more perfect past goes back at least as far as Plato, who probably got it from the Indians, and it keeps showing up whenever the world seems to change in a fundamental way. People desire to return to a former and better time when they feel, like the British Army after the Battle of Yorktown, the world turned upside down. In America, fear of innovation and nostalgia for tradition has given rise to religious sects such as the Amish, who reject modern technology, to fundamentalist Mormons that practice so-called biblical polygamy, to modern know-nothing political movements such as the late Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority and the Tea Party protesters of the Republican Party. And if you notice, I have a Tea Party photograph there that's a person who's an advocate of the rapture. Now, just to be fair, in Islam, nostalgia for tradition motivates a variety of contemporary activists and thinkers, from the Wahhabis and the Taliban on the far right, to Muslim Brotherhood ideologues such as Sayyid Qutb and Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, that's the founder of Hamas, to the Sufi scholar Sayyid Hossein Nasr, that's the person sniffing the rose, who advocates a philosophy called traditionalism that is explicitly anti-modern. Apart from some New Age Sufis in America and Europe, most real Sufis are traditionalists whose tolerant view of Islam is itself a clarion call against innovation. As a matter of fact, ironically, both Sufis and Wahhabis accuse each other of changing the teachings of original Islam. This traditionalism could be seen as far back as the 9th century of the Common Era, when a Sufi from Baghdad said, and I quote, "Sufism was once a reality without a name, now it's a name without a reality." That was almost 1,200 years ago. Clearly, putting the no in innovation has had a long career in Islamic history. In Islam, the no in innovation revolves around the Arabic word bidah, which for centuries has been the most common religious term for innovation. This term covers a wide range of overlapping meanings, allowing for much confusion and misuse. Bid'ah is now a familiar part of Muslim discourse. Salafi Muslims in particular seem to be addicted to the term, using it without discretion as a rhetorical sledgehammer to crush ideas and practices they do not like. Historically, when the term bid'ah has been used without qualification, it has a pejorative sense, although it covered a wide spectrum of connotations ranging from the highly positive to the completely reprehensible. The root from which the word is derived, and you can see it on the screen here, bid'ah, means to start or begin something. Thus, the primary meaning of bid'ah is to start or begin something novel or new. Among the words directly derived from the root of bid'ah is the divine name al-Badi', the originator, cited in the Quran as one of God's attributes, and for example, in the famous phrase, originator of the heavens and the earth, Badi'a samawati wal ard. The use of Badi'a, the same word with respect to God, denotes the uniqueness of God's creative aspect and implies that he brought the world into existence without a previously existing model. As an adjective, the word Badi'a is also used to refer to outstanding works of human genius, especially those of great poets and other masters of the spoken and written word, and I have an example there. Related to this meaning is also another form of the root that is used more often in modern times than in the past. This is the word ibda', which is the Arabic term for creativity. The semantic relation in Arabic between the notions of creativity and innovation, which is a pejorative term, is significant and is probably worth considering. Unlike Badi'a or Ibda', the word bid'ah, innovation, has almost always been pejorative and was used before Islam to condemn actions and ideas that lacked precedent in custom or were unauthorized by tribal leaders. Thus, even in pre-Islamic Arabia, bid'ah connoted innovation as a sort of heresy, a deviation from established norms and ways of the past. When the Prophet Muhammad appeared, his message of Islam challenged the established order of Arabia and was condemned by the pagan Arabs as bid'ah. The Prophet, following what the Quran says, countered this accusation by turning the concept of bid'ah on its head, undercutting the allegations of his opponents. Islam was neither a heresy nor an innovation, he replied. Rather, Islam was a restoration of the common legacy of the biblical prophets, such as Abraham, Ishmael, and Moses, Christian prophets, from the Islamic perspective, such as John the Baptist and Jesus, and some early Arabian prophets. This ideological battle is reflected in a Quranic verse that commands the prophet to declare to his opponents, and the Quran says to him, "Say, I am no novelty, bid among the messengers." While this verse indicates that the message of Islam possesses direct continuity with ancient norms, and this point's made explicitly in other Quranic passages as well, it also intimates that the pagan beliefs and customs of Muhammad's opponents were the real bid'ah, because they lacked continuity with authentic religious teachings and had veered long ago from the best of ancient ways. Before the coming of Islam, the concept of bid'ah also belonged to a wider semantic field that linked it with its opposite, which is the word sunnah, which means established tradition. Before Islam, it was established tribal tradition. Just as it did with bid'ah, Islam took over the term sunnah, but redefined its meaning. As I mentioned before, in pre-Islamic Arabia, it denoted a sort of traditional law that was defined by custom and embodied in the norms of thought and practice of each community. Thus, each instance of bid'ah in the pre-Islamic period conjured up an image of a long-established sunnah that it threatened. Rooted in tribal practice, the pre-Islamic bid'ah-sunnah dichotomy was doggedly conservative and functioned to ensure the status quo. With the advent of Islam, the term sunnah came to be associated with the normative teachings and conduct of the Prophet Muhammad. That's how Muslims understand sunnah today. The original link between sunnah and bid'ah was maintained, but now both concepts were rooted in scriptural and prophetic authority. Now, the Quran only contains one reference to innovation derived directly from the root of bid'ah. Interestingly enough, this verse refers to Jesus and the early Christians, and I quote, "We instilled kindliness and mercy in the hearts of those who followed him, and monasticism, rahbaniyah, which they innovated, in Arabic, ibtada'uha. A common interpretation of this verse asserts that monasticism was a human innovation, which God did not prescribe for Jesus' followers. However, they instituted it themselves, seeking God's pleasure. Although this verse does not condemn the innovation of monasticism per se, most Muslims tend to view the practice of monasticism as an unwarranted departure from the Sunnah of God and his Prophet. Following the well-known hadith, there is no monasticism in Islam. La rahbaniyata fil Islam. Negative references to bid'ah are also common in the hadith collections of all Islamic sects. One shared hadith on the subject is the well-known admonition of the Prophet, the worst of things are innovations, muhdathat, and every bid'ah is misguidance, dalala. You'll see that there, it's under the bad bid'ah designation. This hadith, or this tradition, constitutes one of the most categorical rejections of innovation in Islam and has been taken at face value by scriptural literalists for centuries. However, in Sunni Islam at least, innovation has also been classified under the rubric of good innovation, or bid'ah hasana. There you can say good bid'ah at the very bottom. Perhaps the most famous example of this is the Caliph Omar's decision to institute supererogatory group prayers during the nights of Ramadan. And the story goes that Omar went by the mosque one day at night in Ramadan and saw people praying individually in kind of a chaotic manner. And so he decided to institute a group prayer to make it more efficient. And after this was done, he came by the mosque another night, saw everybody praying together, and he said, "What a good bid'ah this is." However, in general, throughout the pre-modern period of Islam, the concept of bid'ah was both classificatory and judgmental. Although it was not intended to rule out new ideas completely, it most often served as a control mechanism and was used by traditionalists to put new ideas on trial, exonerating some and eliminating or condemning others. Politically, the concept of bid'ah, or innovation, was conservative and inhibiting. Its criteria imposed a restrictive frame on creative ideas to ensure continuity with tradition and conformity to legal principles. It must be stressed, however, that setting parameters for innovation does not necessarily condemn innovation. However, there has been a tendency to do so in Islamic history. In Islamic history as well, whenever innovations in Islamic practice were introduced, the most common tendency has been to veil them from the accusation of bid'ah by making them appear as a sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, if not in fact, at least in spirit. Now, one of the clearest ways to illustrate the inhibiting effects of the category of bid'ah in Islamic thought is to examine its influence on Islamic political philosophy. This subject has always been fraught with controversy because the Prophet Muhammad left no clear sunnah about how the Muslims were to govern themselves after his death. For Sunni Muslims, and we have it here, the solution to this problem could be found in the Caliphate, in which a member of the Prophet Muhammad's tribe of Quraysh took over Muhammad's political functions, ideally by consensus. The picture of the coin that you can see on the left of the picture is a copy of an Umayyad caliphal coin, which purports to show a picture of the Caliph himself. If you look closely at this, you'll notice that he's wearing hair and a kind of a sash and a robe the way the Byzantine emperors were dressed. Again, so we try to think of the early Muslims as something like Saudi Arabian camel riders. Obviously, we're talking about in reality something very different. In Shiite Islam, the answer to this question of succession was the imamate, that's the picture in the middle, in which a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad assumed both political leadership and the right to interpret Islamic scriptures. This picture is a common Shi'i picture of Imam Ali, who's considered the true successor to the Prophet Muhammad by the Shia. And again, in case any of you have learned that Muslims don't draw pictures of famous figures, it's not entirely true, at least not in Shi'i Islam. This is a very common, it's almost like a Jesus image, a kind of an iconic image that's used anywhere the Shia have a large population, such as Iraq, Bahrain, Iran, anywhere you have a Shi'i population. What's really funny, if you look at a picture of all the imams, they tend all to look alike. There's 12 imams, and they're all sort of cut out of the same mold. Now, for Kharijite Muslims, that's the third picture, who can still be found in Oman and parts of Algeria and Tunisia, the answer to this question of succession was the Amirate, in which the best available Muslim assumed temporary political and military authority and could be removed by popular vote. By the way, the kind of government that is most often practiced by extremist groups such as Al-Qaeda follows this Amirate model that was first set by the Kharijites, that the leader is essentially a military leader, although there's a secondary religious and teaching function, but technically this person can be removed by a consensus of his followers. As one recent observer has remarked about this issue, the Sunnis loved the Prophet so much they felt they couldn't duplicate him. That's why they had the caliphate. They couldn't duplicate him. The Shia loved him so much they felt they couldn't do without him. That's why they wanted a descendant of the Prophet. Ironically, only the Kharijites used the Sunnah to move beyond a tribal or personalistic view of the Prophet's legacy. Occasionally, however, a few brave thinkers went out on a limb and suggested models of government that sought to retain the spirit of the Sunnah without major guidance from prophetic tradition. One of these was the father of Islamic political philosophy, Abu Nasr Muhammad al-Farabi, who died in 950. What's nice about the World Wide Web is you can find pictures of people who lived over 1,000 years ago and never had paintings made of them. This is a picture of al-Farabi that appears on the one tenge bill. That's like the $1 bill from the country of Kazakhstan. Farabi, who is known to the medieval Christian world as Al-Farabius or Abu Nasr, was born in Turkmenistan around the year 870. His father was a military officer and his grandfather was a Turkish convert to Islam. This is why he looks Central Asian Turkish in the picture. Apart from Turkish, he could speak and write in Arabic and Persian, and probably could read Aramaic and Greek as well. Although he was a Muslim, Farabi represented the tradition of the Greek philosophical school of Alexandria in Egypt, which was traced from teacher to teacher back to the masters of late antiquity. Surviving fragments of his autobiography tell us that he was first exposed to philosophy in Turkmenistan. Now, al-Farabi was no fundamentalist. His teacher was the Nestorian Christian monk Yuhanna ibn Haylan, who lived at the monastery of Masr Ghassan near the city of Marv in Turkmenistan. These are some pictures from the Nestorian tradition. Of what's left of Nestorian Christians today are Chaldean Christians in Iraq, even though the Nestorian beliefs are no longer theologically followed, as far as I'm aware. The writing you see is Western Aramaic or Syriac writing. The piece in the middle on the top says welcome, on the bottom says peace. So it's basically, the last word is shalom, salam. Again, it's written very much like Arabic, as you can see. The monument with the cross that's on the lower left is a Nestorian monument from Western China. The Nestorian trade networks went all the way from Iraq to China through the Silk Road. And the ruins you see on the lower right, these are the ruins of Gondi Shapur. This is north of Baghdad in Iraq, which was a major center of Nestorian learning and translation. The monastery of Yuhanna ibn Haylan, Farabi's teacher, was a satellite of Gondi Shapur, where Nestorian translators preserved much of the Greek philosophic and scientific heritage for centuries. Farabi was devoted to his Christian teacher and followed him to Baghdad and possibly even to Constantinople. Upon returning to Baghdad, he studied under another Nestorian monk whose name was Matta ibn Yunus, that's Matthew, son of Jonah, who was one of the foremost translators of Aristotle's works. After the death of Ibn Yunus, Farabi moved on to Damascus, where he composed his most important political work. In Arabic, it's called Mabadi Ara Ahl al-Medina al-Fadila, or Introduction to the Views of the Inhabitants of the Virtuous City. Here's again, a slide I made for you of the genealogy of the virtuous city. The ideas start in Plato's Republic, picking up a little bit from Aristotle's Politics. You've got Farabi's two works, The Virtuous City and The Civic Politics. I have another picture of somebody who's been dead for more than 800 years, Averroes, the philosopher Ibn Rushd, who did a commentary on Plato's Republic, and eventually you find these ideas replicated by Imam Khomeini in his book Islamic Government, which led to the Islamic Republic of Iran that we know today. Farabi, as I said, Farabi's political masterwork is best described as an Islamized version of Plato's Republic. He agreed with Plato that the only way to achieve ultimate virtue and happiness in society was to engage in a radical form of utopian social engineering that today we would call totalitarian. The major difference between Plato and Farabi's model of the perfect state is that Farabi, being a Muslim, saw the original perfect society as the Prophet Muhammad's community in Medina. Although he would disagree with arch fundamentalists such as the Taliban, who try to recreate the golden age of Muhammad's Medina as literally as possible, he did believe that it was possible to engineer society in such a way as to recreate the virtues and ethics of the Prophet's city. He agreed with Plato that the best ruler of the virtuous society was a philosopher. Although today's Salafi fundamentalists consider Farabi to have been a heretic and sometimes even an unbeliever, his political theories have been extremely influential among Shi'i Muslims. For example, as I mentioned before, the Islamic Republic of Iran is modeled to 2 categories. The first are societies of ignorance, or cities of ignorance. I have them here. These are societies in which the inhabitants, quote, do not know true happiness, nor has it occurred to them, such that if they were guided toward it, they would neither understand it nor believe it. The second category, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, is this category of errant or misguided societies. These are societies in which the inhabitants know happiness, yet they refuse to seek it because of their weakness or vanity. Although these imperfect societies are discussed briefly in The Virtuous City, they are given a more detailed treatment in another treatise of Farabi called Civic Politics, As-Siyasa al-Madaniya. Again, just to show how important this work is in Iran, Sayyid Mohammad Khatami, former president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, discussed this latter work in a series of lectures that he gave at the Graduate School of Education in Tehran in 1994 and 1995. These lectures, which were titled Voyage to the Heart of Muslim Political Thought, were published in a French translation in 2005. So what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is discuss Farabi's view of the imperfect societies based on my own reading of The Virtuous City, because I have the original in Arabic, and on Khatami's reading of Civic Politics. So here are the 6 types of cities of ignorance or ignorant societies for Farabi. The first he calls the necessity-based society, or society of necessity. This is the most primitive and primary form of society, which brings together the minimal conditions of human association, in which human groups are characterized by savagery. He actually uses the term bahimion taba. He says their nature is like animals. It is called the society of necessity because social organization is based on the barest necessities such as food, shelter, and physical protection. According to Farabi, who's no Democrat, its inhabitants are useless for anything but slavery. The second type of society is the society or city of baseness. This is Plato's oligarchy. This is a society in which the inhabitants cooperate in order to attain property and wealth, not in order to attain wealth for the sake of another goal, but because wealth is an end in itself. So this would be Florida, all right, before the crash. The third society, I think you know where I'm going here, the society of hedonism and ruin, Medinat al-Khissa wa Suqut, that's Las Vegas. In this society, the goal of the inhabitants is the enjoyment of pleasure associated with food, drink, and sexual intercourse, he says it specifically, and in general with the pleasures of the senses and the imagination, and who give preference to entertainment and idle play in every way and manner. Need I say more about Las Vegas? The fourth is the society of honor, Medinat al-Karama. That's, Plato called it a timocracy. In this society, the aim of the people is to cooperate to attain honor and distinction and fame among the nations, to be extolled and treated with respect in word and deed, and to attain glory and splendor either in the eyes of others or among themselves, each according to his love of such distinction. Now, that's the timocracy. Now, the fifth is tyranny. Okay, Medinat al-Taghallub says the aim of its people is to dominate others and to prevent others from dominating them, their only purpose in life being the enjoyment they get from power. Okay, The leader of such a society is the most capable, efficient, manipulative, and perceptive in dominating others and bending them to his will. Finally, we come to number 6, the assembly-based city. This is our democracy. It's called in Arabic al-Madina al-Jama'iyya. This is Farabi's version of what we think is the best human condition. According to Mohammad Khatami, the former president of Iran, quote, in this city one can find all sorts of personalities, tendencies, and comportments. Various human groups, both eminent and lowly, are assembled in it. The regime that rules this city is different from other cities, and sovereignty comes from the people. The person who fulfills the function of leader occupies himself with the will of the people and follows their desires and in his administration. All right, this is interesting because remember, Khatami's writing this in 1994 and 1995, and it's just as if he's copying right out of a medieval text. And again, he's not showing any indication in his book that he has any deep knowledge of how an American democracy really works. As a matter of fact, in his critiques of the system in Iran, the only thing he really calls for is a replacement of the one supreme leader with an assembly of 6 or more jurists of similar stature. So he basically goes for a collective leadership, but he really doesn't want to change the system very much at all. Now, so far so good, though, with what Khatami says. But then Farabi himself adds another description. He says, and I quote, the aim of the people in a democratic society is to be free, each one doing whatever he wants without restraining his passions in the least. Now, this is not praise for democracy, but blame. Farabi also characterizes democracy with another name. He calls it the society of the free, Medinat al-Ahrar. He means to say here that democracy is based on complete personal freedom, which means freedom from duties, freedom from discipline and self-control, freedom to pursue one's momentary desires and pleasures. At best, for him, democracy is a sort of happy chaos or near anarchy. In it, all sorts of desires come together along with all classes of people and modes of behavior. Intelligent men, such as philosophers, and virtuous people, such as sages, can arise from it, but so can orators and poets who are of somewhat mixed value. At its worst, democracy leads to anarchy, and anarchy can lead to tyranny. However, even at its best, democracy is dangerous because it treats people as equal, even if they are not really equal in value. In civic politics, Farabi describes the typical ruler of a democracy as a supple and intelligent politician and capable orator who maintains power by following public opinion and staying in line with the wishes of his constituents. Who is he describing? Bill Clinton. No, seriously, very much like Bill Clinton. The people are satisfied with this situation, but can they really say that their society is the best? This view of democracy certainly does not reflect the normative political vision of democracy that we have all learned in school. Instead, it more closely resembles Pat Robertson's caricature of liberalism. What ultimately saves Farabi's ignorant societies from perdition is that they all belong to foreign lands and have not been exposed to the truth, whether it's the truth of Islam or the Greek tradition of philosophy represented by Plato and Aristotle. For Farabi, there was no extant society that could be called a democracy. What he described was the far-away example of Plato's Athens, a nobly intentioned but unstable historical oddity that was useful only as a thought experiment. He never imagined that such a society could actually exist, or even worse, that it could provide a counter-ideology to Islamic government. However, just 2.5 centuries after Farabi, the Andalusian philosopher Averroes, or Ibn Rushd, saw democracy in the popular regimes that sprang up in some of the city-states of Islamic Spain after the fall of the Spanish Umayyad Caliphate. In his commentary on Plato's Republic, he describes democracy as a quasi-anarchical system of government whose internal contradictions forestall any hope of a long-term existence. For Averroes, democratic society resembled, and I quote, a many-colored woven garment. Just as this kind of garment is considered by women and youths to be good because of the variety of its colors, so seems to be the thought about the city according to unexamined opinion. But in truth, it's not so. Unless democracy is strengthened by virtue or honor, it perishes rapidly. Well, he might be right about that part. Unlike Farabi, whose political science was based on Plato, Averroes followed Aristotle. For him, rule by the people conjured up images of tribal societies, such as those of the Bedouin Arabs or North African Berbers, who sometimes governed themselves through tribal councils or assemblies. Because of these examples, he saw democracy as the next stage of societal evolution after the primitive society. For Aristotle, who was the tutor of Alexander the Great, there's Aristotle, Alexander the Great, and Averroes, the best system of government was monarchy, followed by aristocracy, which for Aristotle meant rule by the best. That's Aristos. Averroes felt the same way and differed from Farabi by arranging the forms of government in a different order, from the best to the worst. This is what you have here. However, he agreed that democracy should never be considered a positive innovation. Now, here's where it really gets interesting. For Farabi, innovation itself was the key problem. Not only were there ignorant societies, but there were also societies he called, and I quote, bad weeds that are like ryegrass to wheat and like brambles and other useless plants that are ruinous to the crops found in the countryside. These bad weeds are societies that are not ignorant of truth and virtue, but rather have deviated on purpose from the way to happiness. The citizens of these bad weeds are morally deficient, mutanassiqun in Arabic. They are people whose ideas and motivations are different from normal people. They are deviants or nonconformists, marikun, falsifiers, munharifun, and who lead others astray or are so deluded in their vanity that they believe that their false ways are true. Farabi classifies bad weed societies into three types. The first is the wicked society, el-Medina al-Fasiqa. Again, this is Las Vegas. This is the society of sinners. It knows and accepts the goals of a true society, but the actions of its people are actions of the people of the ignorant cities. The second one, and this is the one I'm really focusing on here, is what he calls the changeable society, el-Medina al-Mubaddila. This is a society of people whose ideas and actions in the past were those of the true virtuous society, quote, but they have changed because different ideas have entered into the society and they have made other actions allowable. Okay, now you see where I'm going with my discussion of innovation and bidah. The very notion of change from tradition is seen as fundamentally flawed in the eyes of this thinker who was a Muslim philosopher, far from a fundamentalist, far from a conservative. I mean, he was a modern for his time, and yet he has the same problem with innovation. And of course, all of that leads to the third type, which is the errant or misguided society. This is a society whose inhabitants aim for salvation after this life, but who have pernicious ideas about God and metaphysical things that they think are improvements on the past. Here's exactly what both Danielle and Jim were talking about earlier today. Again, we think we know better, so we're changing the rules of the game through modernity. This, according to this view, to Farabi's view, is the errant or misguided society. Now, according to Muhammad Khatami, when Farabi wrote about these societies, he was thinking about the nations of Christians and Jews who, according to Islamic doctrine, originally learned the teachings of the prophets of Islam but deviated from them. Since Western societies are largely made up of Christians and Jews, and since the West introduced democracy as a political alternative in the Muslim world, it is easy to see how Farabi's model of deviant societies can be applied to contemporary Western nations. Since Western democratic liberalism is based in large part on secular and relativistic philosophies, such as utilitarianism and pragmatism, it is easy to see how Farabi's successors might view democracy and liberalism as errant beliefs taught by false prophets such as Thomas Jefferson, John Stuart Mill, or John Dewey. For traditionalist Muslims who still inhabit the intellectual world of medieval Islam, the very innovativeness of American culture is a sign of its deviance. This can be seen in the critique of democracy that appears in Osama bin Laden's famous letter to the Americans of October 2002. And here it's worth taking a quick look at it to see, again, it says that you Americans are the nation who, rather than ruling by the Sharia of God and its constitution and laws, choose to invent your own laws as you will and desire. You separate religion from your policies, contradicting the pure nature that affirms absolute authority to the Lord and your Creator. Whoops, sorry, wrong direction. Now, if you go back to Farabi's Bad Weeds, you see that bin Laden is saying exactly the same thing that Farabi says when he talks about the changeable city, the changeable society, where people start mixing things up and changing it because they're not satisfied with the traditions of the past, which leads to the errant and misguided society. So here's an interesting paradox. We have bin Laden, who considers Farabi a heretic or even an unbeliever, using exactly the same categories of thought that Farabi himself uses. Now, this resemblance between the worldviews of the good Muslim philosopher Farabi, remember, who learned from Christians, and the bad Muslim terrorist and Wahhabi Osama bin Laden should make us all stop and reflect on our assumptions about whether or not Islam has really been hijacked by extremists. Now, what makes the doctrines of extremists such as Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, and I'll talk about him tonight, resonate with many traditionalist Muslims is that, notwithstanding their violence, many of their ideas, their political ideas and their critiques are in line with long-held Islamic beliefs. The key to the similarity between Farabi and bin Laden does not lie in their overall view of Islam, which is in fact very different, but rather in their negative view of innovation. It's important to recall, as I said, that Farabi was one of the moderns of his time. However, his notion of the contemporary was very different from our notion of the contemporary. For Farabi, that which is good is eternally good and is not subject to change or revision. Because the citizens of the bad weed societies allow different philosophies and religious views to seduce them, they also made certain behaviors allowable that otherwise would not have been considered. What are the behaviors that Farabi considered reprehensible? Well, to modernize them a little bit, they include some of the attitudes and policies most frequently associated with contemporary notions of modernity, such as individualism, he mentions that, the unrestrained pursuit of wealth, let's call it capitalism in the Michael Moore version, the belief that the material world is the touchstone for all reality. This includes a host of materialistic philosophies such as utilitarianism, socialism, communism, and even positivistic science. Other modern beliefs that Farabi considered blamable include social egalitarianism, that's bad, he mentions that. Gender equality, remember Averroes talking about that many-colored garment that only women like because it's pretty. And the idea of personal choice of lifestyle. Okay, all of these are fundamental to what we consider normal, but these are considered reprehensible. Although Muslim philosophers such as Farabi and Averroes favored reason over tradition when interpreting the Quran, this did not mean that they were not traditionalists. Although they did not always rely on the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, they still agreed with their Muslim opponents that truth relies more in tradition than in innovation. For them, the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle were not foreign teachings. Instead, they were ancient wisdom traditions that prefigured the doctrines of Islam. It was common, in fact, for medieval Muslims, like medieval Christians, to think of Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and other great figures of Greek philosophy as monotheists who would have become Muslim if they had only been exposed to the Quran. The difference between medieval Muslim philosophers such as Farabi and today's Islamic arch-conservatives was not an overall difference of worldview. Indeed, both shared a traditionalistic worldview that sees change, and by implication newness or modernity, as blameworthy innovation or bidah. The difference between them lay not in the acceptance of tradition per se, but in the sources of tradition that they use to support their traditionalism. For groups such as the Wahhabis and the Taliban, these sources are the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and as-Salaf as-Salih, the righteous forebears. For medieval Muslim philosophers like Farabi and Averroes, they were the Quran and the wisdom of the ancient Greek sages. Now, for contemporary Muslims, the problem with finding modern traditions that are analogous to the traditions of Greek philosophy that inspired Farabi and Averroes is that the very premises of our modernity stand condemned in the history of Islamic thought as errant or misguided. The result is that any turn toward modernity by Muslims can be viewed as a threat to Islam itself. The modern epistemology most feared by conservative Muslims is what Anthony Giddens, and he's the first quotation we have here, has termed wholesale reflexivity. The idea that we must continually examine and then re-examine our assumptions. Giddens says about this perspective, we are abroad in a world which is thoroughly constituted through reflexively applied knowledge, but where at the same time we can never be sure that any given element of that knowledge will not be revised. A world in which knowledge and truth are always contested and revised is a world where it seems impossible for the traditional person to make the correct choices, to successfully thread his or her way through the moral labyrinth of the human condition. A world where reflexivity is a constant condition is a world of great stress for the traditional believer because the old certainties of community, society, and even family are cast into doubt. The Moroccan feminist scholar Fatima Marnisi, she's the second one there, calls this fear of self-reflexivity a mal du présent, a fear of the present in which the alienated Muslim feels, she says, a desire for death, a desire to be elsewhere, to be absent, to flee to the past as a way of being absent, a suicidal absence. It would be hard to find a better example of this malaise that she talks about than in the psychological insecurity evoked by Mohammed Siddiq Khan, one of the London suicide bombers of July 7th, 2005. In the martyrdom video that he produced before setting out on his mission, he stated, "Until we feel security, you will be our targets." A century ago, Winston Churchill criticized the traditional worldview of Islam by writing in his account of the British reconquest of the Sudan, and I quote, "Individual Muslims may show splendid qualities, but the influence of religion paralyzes the social development of those who follow it." One may argue that Churchill's assessment is unfair, but if development is to be measured by Western standards of modernity, recent history has demonstrated that in many cases, the concept of a clash of civilizations cannot be dismissed out of hand. For millions of traditionalistic Muslims, the crisis of modernity is first and foremost an epistemological crisis. By the way, just to be clear, I'm not talking about Huntington's clash of civilizations. I'm talking about a clash of worldviews that lies behind many of the misunderstandings that we have. According to the philosopher Alistair MacIntyre, the Notre Dame philosopher, an epistemological crisis is a crisis of knowledge and truth in which conflicts over rival answers to key questions can no longer be settled rationally. Furthermore, he says, arguments that have worked in the past have the effect of disclosing new inadequacies, hitherto unrecognized incoherences, and new problems for the solution of which there seem to be insufficient or no resources within the established fabric of belief. If such a crisis is to be resolved, new concepts and frameworks for the traditions of Islam need to be developed. According to MacIntyre, such frameworks must meet three conditions. First, they must constitute a new tradition themselves. They must provide a systematic and coherent solution to problems that have proven to be intractable in the crisis situation. Second, these new concepts must be critical. They must provide an explanation of what it was that rendered the original tradition, before acquiring new resources, sterile or incoherent or both. Point two is what I've been trying to do today. Finally, they must be authentic. They must exhibit continuity with the shared beliefs that have served to define the tradition of Islam in the past. How Muslims are to meet this challenge is perhaps the most important question for Islam in the 21st century. Thanks.